Hello and welcome to UKEdChat After Hours. Today we are going to be talking about blended learning, which is a particular interest of mine because as a technology expert, I try to do lots of blended learning into my lessons. But I hope to learn lots of things with the two experts I have with me. And just to introduce myself, I'm Martin. I'm ICT Magic on Twitter, one of the little helpers at UKEdChat. And if you're watching live, then you can join the discussion. There is a chat bar within the webinar room that we're discussing in now. If you're looking at the archive version of this, then there should be a link with all of the things we're discussing to the show notes, so you can catch up. And also, if you'd like to comment wherever you found where you're watching or listening to this. So without any further ado, can I introduce, or can I ask Buki, can you introduce yourself?
Hi.
Who are you and where do you teach? And various other things like that.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Martin. Right. So my name's Buki Youssef. My Twitter handle is @rondell10_B. I teach at a special school, which is also alternative provision in London near Wembley. So I am a senior leader in charge of teaching and learning at my school. I'm also a science teacher, I love teaching, and also a qualified coach. And I do a number of different things with a number of different organisations, including at SLT Chats, Women Ed, and BAMED. I'm also a leadership a leadership matters ambassador. And if you're wondering how do I do all of this, it's through the use of technology. So thank you.
Okay, and David, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm David Chalk. You can find me on Twitter at TeachChalky1. I'm a secondary science teacher. I'm a second in department. I've been teaching for years, about 13 years, I think. And I'm really interested in this blended learning. I make a lot of videos. You can find my YouTube channel at Miss Vision Tips. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, and we'll make sure there are links to both of your activities in the show notes, just so people can find out everything about you and follow up some of the things that you do. But really do check out both of these people on Twitter because they are fantastic. They share such fantastic things, especially the fact we've got two science teachers in the same room. Fantastic. So we've just had the discussion, and I know that both of you took part in it to various degrees, so you saw some of the comments which came through, and perhaps you can draw upon some of the comments which were made during the hour-long chat that we've just had on Twitter. But I'm going to go through some of the questions that we had during the chat and see what you have in response to that. So the first question really, because it means many things to many different people, is what is blended learning? So David, could I go to you first, perhaps?
Well, I think blended learning, especially now, is bringing lots and lots of different things together. So it's not just setting, right, so here's some questions for you to go and do. Here's a PowerPoint worth of notes for you to go and work through. Here's a link to go and do a few multiple choice questions on Microsoft so you can get some sort of instant feedback. Here's a link to a video that's bespoke to those particular resources, and here's a range of things that if you really want to stretch yourself, you can go and have a go at. As well as that, if it'd be lovely to do some sort of live learning with students, but if you could incorporate some sort of learning, and then when we eventually, fingers crossed, do get back into school, it will all start to come together and it will work with you physically doing in the classroom. And I'd like to think that it's all going to blend together and almost be seamless. It might not be, but that's the hope.
I think that was a really interesting point you made about the fact that people, the pupils can extend themselves further if they want to, or if they didn't get it first time, they can go back over it. So the fact that it's adaptable in the independent setting of perhaps doing it at home or at their own pace, even in the classroom. So Buki, what does blended learning mean to you?
Pretty much what David said, but what I would just basically say, it's an opportunity to combine learning that takes place away from school. So it could be remote, it could be home, and complementing it will actually takes place within school. And I know other people, but there's so many different definitions. Where I did some research, someone said, I saw one link that had like 10 different ways in which you can actually undertake blended learning. But I think in essence, it's what we call, some people call traditionally flipped learning, where the learning actually takes place off-site, traditionally at home, but then there's an opportunity to apply and assess the learning with the teacher's support in school as well. So you can actually just look at how it's, the learning's been undertaken and how you apply it in different contexts.
Mm. So can you give any examples of the times where you've used blended learning within your own classroom or your own extended teaching, or even perhaps when you've done your coaching sessions for adults and teachers and that kind of thing? So where have you used blended learning within your teaching and learning?
Yeah. So if I use it with, say, like, for example, adults, it's an opportunity to provide some, say, like, learning resources. So it might be something that, that gives an idea about what the session is going to cover. So I do that. So they get an idea, they get a better context about what the session undertakes. To say, like, for example, with coaching, and it prepares them better, but also gives an opportunity to ask questions in relation to anything they actually read or any other aspects they've actually come across before we then undertake the session. So I suppose it's preparation. It's preparatory. When I've used it, say, for example, in say, like a school setting, again, it's providing students with, the learning content, in a variety of ways, but suits their learning needs as well. I think that's really important, so that when they and they have the time to engage with it, maybe repeat different aspects, maybe drill down, so they cover the breadth and depth in relation to, like, the national curriculum. But when we're there with me, what we do is look at their application and their knowledge and maybe even skills. So the blended learning part that they do themselves provide a foundation, which we then, together with the teacher's assistant, actually build upon, and just, again, just to assess and demonstrate their learning.
I'd like to come back to the point in a moment about the fact that you said it's for preparation. What about for after the lesson, and how does the feedback work going from pupil to teacher about how the performance of the lesson went? So perhaps I can ask you that in a moment. But before that, David, can I ask you the same question about examples from your own classroom of where blended learning's happened?
Well, very much I'd have to agree. It's about giving students the notes and the content before they get into the lesson, so they've got a chance to go over it and look at things. I find, particularly when I'm teaching A-level biology, because it's so content heavy, if they've had chance to go through and watch stuff that's bespoke to the lesson and go through the notes that you're going to use before they get in there, then that gives them a lot more time to ask questions and such forth, because you don't have to spend so long on the delivery side. And in terms of carrying out CPD with staff, I fully agree that giving the staff the resources and the stuff to go through beforehand. So within that session, because a CPD session at school, usually it can be something like only an hour twilight. After an hour, after people have been teaching all day, people are ready to go home anyway. But if they've had that information to go through beforehand, then rather than you sitting there or standing there and just delivering it and talking at them and them turning off, they can go in. It makes it more interactive because they've already got the stuff there, and then they can go and ask you questions, and you can really dig down into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think also that then negates those famous words, "This could have been done within an email," which happens so often when you have to read through lots of notes before a meeting, and then you get to those nitty-gritty bits, which are actually the interesting bits and the collaborative bits, which happen within either the classroom setting, if it's with pupils, or within a training session for teachers. So what kind of barriers do you feel that there are for blended learning? I know that this particular question got quite a lot of response on the Twitter chat that we just had, but David, what do you think? What are the barriers to blended learning?
I think without being too heated about it, it's the fact that some students have access to IT, they know what they're doing, they come from an affluent background, so there's no barriers. Some students come from really deprived backgrounds where there's either one computer between 4 children, or they've not got any access to it at all. So there's no physical way for them to access what you've set them to do at home. So sometimes you almost have to think about, don't go straight down the line of just doing it IT based. It's nice to have some sort of backup there. So if the students can't access it online for whatever reason, then you can go and give them something else so they're not missing out. That quite often can be easier said than done, especially when you're using video stuff. I would like it if the government could have got out the laptops and the internet access that they claim that they were going to get out, which I'm yet to see. I won't get angry.
Yes, and I think we all hope that. Yes. So, Bookie, can I come back to the point which I made before this set of questions about the feedback, and also could you follow on maybe with some of your own thoughts about barriers to blended learning?
Okay, so with regards to feedback, and I think this is one of my favorite things, and the fact that depending on what type of tools you use, so I love to use, say, like Google Forms. It's a really easy way to have like a variety of different questions, including exam questions. And I'm taking this from a student, teaching students context, where I can actually just see what they've understood, any areas of development, and actually provide feedback as well. It's one of my favorite things. So we tend to do this again, all within the Google suite of, for education. So, you can actually have maybe use Google Classroom to say, well done for doing this, and then give them some feedback, maybe put it within a document. There's a variety of different ways, but I think it's really important. Obviously, it replicates what happens in a school setting where they do a piece of work. You need to acknowledge what they've done well, where progress actually been made, what need to develop. So that's what we tend to do within my setting. So with regards to barriers, I think there are 3 main aspects that I've actually identified. First of all, not every student actually likes to work in this way. It just doesn't suit their needs. They need to be within a classroom setting. Secondly, it's difficult to replicate where you have students, particularly who, you would describe as special educational needs, SEND students, who need to actually have physical learning resources. And that can be difficult to replicate in, an electronic sense. I know there are some things like, say, like BoomYard, where it's more interactive, but that's quite limited. And I think also as well, we need to recognise that some students need to have someone by them as part of their, support, access learning and things like that. And again, that's very difficult to replicate. Parents, carers and guardians will do their very best. But unless the school provides specific, instructions for how to support and also resources, it's very challenging for them.
So does that pull the rug out of blended learning altogether? Does that mean that it shouldn't be used because it's not accessible to a few students, or should we try to cater for those students who do have access and put in provision for those who don't, which is offline or in a different way? If there is a gap there, then how do we fill that gap? Bookie, can you maybe continue that point?
Yeah, so does it mean we shouldn't continue with it? No, I don't think so. But what it does mean is that you've got to explore and find out what works best for your students and the learning community. And by learning community, I also include the parents, carers and guardians, because in a way we are relying upon them to try and make some of this learning actually work. In terms of gaps, David actually mentioned it before about the digital divide. So in answer to your question about the fact that I did see an alert that the government have actually provided, or DFE actually provided some of the laptops and the 4G access, and so that's something there, because I was very interested in thinking what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, because we need these things now. But I think also as well, it might be, say, like for example, the school looking at resources they can possibly use, particularly if you don't have all the students who are at home learning and or on site. There could be a possibility. I know in terms of access, that's not going to be great, because some schools don't have the laptops and equipment to do that. But it also may mean that we think about how can we use mobile learning on mobile. Not ideal, but for example, students have ready access to mobiles, like for example, one in my hand, and thinking about how can we actually make the learning resources, the learning environment meaningful through the gadget that they've got ready access to, but still allows them to demonstrate progress and learning that they're undertaking as well. So it's just an opportunity to rethink things in different ways. But I think more importantly, from an informed basis, find out what your students have, what their families have, think about how you could actually make that work.
I completely agree. But to play devil's advocate, does this mean that there is a race to the bottom in the fact that you're saying that you can't use a particular device because not all pupils have it, or you're not going to use particular bandwidth because not all pupils have internet access to a certain degree at home? David, what do you think about that? Race to the bottom?
Oh, no, definitely not. Definitely not. I think it's a case of you go and you provide the best that you can possibly provide, but have a backup plan for when that's not possible. So everything that we provided digitally for the last 12 weeks, I know that there's a list of about 60 students who've had everything printed out for them for the last 12 weeks. So, and we've just sent the work in as a department to the front office, and they printed it out, and parents have actually been good enough to come in and collect it. And I think there's a few cases where we've gone out and delivered it. So I don't think it's a race to the bottom. I think it's about do the best that you possibly can with the tools that you've got at hand, but have a backup plan, have something there ready for if a student can't access it for whatever reason.
Right, my favourite. We're talking about tools and websites and things that you can use for blended learning. So, Bookie, what kind of resources do you find most useful in your classroom for blended learning, or outside the classroom for blended learning? What kind of things? You've already mentioned Google Classroom and the suite of tools that Google provides. Maybe you can expand on that, or talk about other tools that you're interested in using.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with Google because that's what we had in place. We didn't really use it effective beforehand, and we realized that in terms of staff confidence of our students, stick with what we know because it aided the continuity between home and school. So for example, what we do is, it depends, so a variety of different things. So we use Google Classroom to maybe upload documents that I've created, where I set maybe like links to videos that David mentioned beforehand, and then just have some review questions just to see and assess what they've understood. That type of thing could be used in their own time, so asynchronously, or if we use Google Meet, so they can actually see my face and just say hello, checking how they are. We can just work through the learning together, so that if there are any issues that they have or they don't understand anything, I'm actually there to provide some support. And that's so that's pretty much the way we use it. Same thing with the slides version. Google Slides and everything like that. It's just making sure that I create the learning resources that I know works best for my students based upon what's worked at school and use that. Where I've noticed that some students have not been able to do that, what we've done is actually purchase books for them. So it might be textbooks, workbooks they can actually go through. They've got a copy, I've got a copy, and we use Google Meet just to work through it. So it's like a classroom setup, but in a virtual space. And I should actually say as well, because of my school and the students have got complex learning needs, we tend to work on a one-to-one basis. So that works most readily.
Interesting. So you mentioned about the pastoral side of things. And I know lots of primary school, obviously not your remit for you two guys, because you're both secondary focused. But speaking as a primary specialist myself, I know that lots of primary schools have focused very much on the pastoral side of things when it comes to video conferencing tools. And maybe more of the work has been done where it's either printable or deliverable on paper. So just give the audience maybe a different perspective, and if you'd like to comment about that, that'd be very interesting to talk about at some point. Maybe in a future chat we can focus on such things. But David, what about future developments for blended learning? Because I'm just thinking 10 years ago, if we were to have a pandemic such as we have, teaching would have been near impossible. And I think we're quite lucky in some ways to have the video conferencing technology come to the fore at such a time. So maybe future gaze a little bit for me, and what do you expect blended learning to maybe look like when school returns, and maybe even a few years after that? What do you think?
I think in some sort of ideal world, and it's not going to be a 5-minute quick fix. I think that's something that's really, really important to stress, that people and teachers will have to think about this and develop things properly over time, rather than rushing through things and getting loads out really quickly that end up not being right. That I've found with a lot of this stuff that I saw that was being set 12 weeks ago, where it was just right, well, that's what we've got to hand, and we'll send that out. It didn't really work for a lot of students because things didn't flow together. So I think in terms of developing things, it'd be nice if and it'll take a few years to get this done, but if you've got a bank of lessons, so say I'm teaching the inheritance module of biology, if we've got a bank of lessons for that, where there's an online video for that lesson, so the students can go and watch the content before the lesson, if they so wish, then if they have access to some notes that's tailored to each lesson, so they've got those to go through. Some students can, if they don't want to go and write things down, I'm not a big lover of them writing down a great deal in lessons, if I'm blatantly honest. But if students wanted to print that out themselves and bring that to lesson just so they can annotate it, that could be a way forward. After the lesson, we use a program called Show My Homework, where it's been a lifesaver. We've set all of the online lessons, lesson by lesson, through Show My Homework, so it's come up on the student's phone, and they can get it on a laptop with what they've got for that lesson. And when any work or anything, or any worksheets or any questions or anything need to be in for, so that's also got the capacity. So after each lesson, you could go and set some sort of short multi-choice quiz on Show My Homework that would give you instant feedback about how much they've got from the lesson. It would give them some sort of instant feedback. And then in terms of a more blended approach, we've just started playing around with Microsoft Teams and forms and stuff. And I'll be blatantly honest, weeks ago, I'd never heard of it whatsoever because we'd never used it before. Nobody's ever told me what this is. And it's something that has just come to the front in the last 8 weeks. It's been a very, very steep learning curve. But that gives you the capacity for them to go, and you can go and set quizzes in there using Google Microsoft Forms and answer it. It works on their phones. So if they've not got access to a PC, they can type things in on their phones. Then you can go and send them feedback on what they've done. And the feedback doesn't have to be very long. Literally, I think we've trialed it with a couple of classes, and the feedback for an entire class for 2 or 3 long answer questions for them to do was less than half an hour, I think, because a lot of the feedback was the same for each student, so they'd all miss one particular point. So a lot of them needed the same feedback, so you didn't need to type out the same each time. It gave you the option that you could copy and paste in the same comment if needs be, and that's kind of worked. So I think there's a lot of scope, but I think we've not got to be complacent about the amount of legwork it might need.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really interesting, the fact that you've said that the lessons have evolved so much over the last 12 weeks. I mean, the 3 of us are obviously on Twitter. We're fairly tech savvy, but many teachers have come from absolute zero. And it really does need to be said and commended, the fact that teachers have really stepped up. And we have been firefighting to a very large extent, and to get anything in those first couple of weeks was amazing. And what's being produced now is actually incredible. So that really does need to be said. But very last question, Bookie, can I ask you the same question about what do you see for the future when it comes to blended learning?
One of the things I really hope to see is a seamless continuity of learning that takes place off-site and on-site, so that it's continuous, there's continuous learning, continuous progress, etc. And I'd also love to see the opportunity of skills being built in. So I just sat down and thought, if we could have anything, what could it be? I think there's a lot in place in terms of the content and the subjects that have you, but maybe not so much with the skills. And by skills, I'm talking about skills that could be used beyond the classroom. So, for example, one of the things that I've been mentioning wherever I can is, could we use blended learning to look at some of the, developing communication skills, interview skills that students could actually use maybe beyond school, maybe as part of, workplace, work experience. Is it an opportunity maybe to use blended learning and in that particular way where work experience might be one of the things that gets squeezed out. And I think because we've got, in some places we might be playing catch up with the content that's been lost, having maybe work experience that taps into students' particular interest may be something we could actually do. So I'm just thinking, I want to see how far we could actually push the boat out in being innovative and being creative with blended learning. So yes, that's some of my thinking for now.
Okay, well, thank you both for practicing your communication skills and being innovative and creative with me during this discussion. So if people want to find you, Bookie, can you just remind people where they can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is @Rondell_B, all lowercase.
Okay, and David, where can they find you?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at TGChalky1, all one word.
Super. Okay, and if you missed any of the links that we've talked about, then we will share them in the show notes. So I'm Martin. I am at ICT Magic on Twitter. You can find out more about what UKEdChat does by going to UKEdChat.com. And thank you very much for listening or possibly watching. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.